Dr. João Lopes' presentation was very interesting about the Psyllid dispersal, and it has everything to do with what I'm going to talk to you about the border effect and control strategies. There's nothing more the border effect is because of the behavior of the insect dispersal. And what is this border effect? In groves where we have a good management of the vector insect, we do not have the disease infection happening in the grove. What we have is the insect coming from outside of the grove, and in that migration from the outside to the inside, it ends up concentrating itself in the outskirts of the farm. Most of them are concentrated in the outskirts of the farm, and that's where we have the highest rate of infection, the highest concentration of plants infected by HLB. And you can see it in these pictures, the lack of plants in the border of farms. So this higher concentration of HLB plants close to the border of the plant is what we call today border effect. This has been already identified in Florida in 2009. In the first greening event they held there, actually in 2008, they were already talking about the border effect and analyzing images by GPS of plants that had been eliminated in the farms. They found that this gradient with a higher concentration of plants with HLB in the first 100 meters of the property. And that gradient goes down when you go into the farm to the most inner plots. And that is because of what we saw later on when we compared where psyllids were found, both in visual inspections as well as with prep inspections. This is something that the study done by Pedro Bacarin, the former student. He did not end the study, but the results that he got were very interesting, showing that up to 25 meters of plots, you would find 24% of psyllids. From 25 to 50 meters, 27% of psyllids. And when you would go more towards the inner area of the plot, you would find less psyllids. Therefore, you will have this chart with 100 and 150 meters, you will find 80 to 95% of psyllids in the plots. So that shows us that the border of the farm, the boundary, is the area in the farm that is most exposed to psyllids that will migrate from groves where there is no management, where these psyllids are created, or backyards or ill-managed groves. So this is the most exposed area. Because of that, we can start thinking about how to use this diagnosis of the insect concentration on the border of the property to improve management of the disease. Initially, we think about the monitoring of the psyllids. So what would be the ideal position to monitor psyllids and to add the yellow sticker traps? So that would be on the border of the property, the first place, the entry place of the psyllids in the farm, and especially close to plots that have no control. Also in shooting plants, pruned groves, irrigated areas that is close of the areas where the insect is coming from the outside of the farm. I can also think about another control strategy when I think about the size of the farm. This border area that we have seen from 100 to 200 meters from the border of the farm, when I have a property or a farm that is broad and continuous, this total border area ends up being smaller than when I have a farm but with narrow plots, and we have several ins and outs of this farm. So this will have a different impact here. Therefore, That helps us to establish new plantings, new projects, always thinking about broad and large areas instead of thinking about not continuous areas. That will reflect on the size of the plots that we should have in the farms. Squared and large plots will have lower border areas or less border areas than if we have narrow and small plots. This is very clear here when you use a large versus a small plots. These are strategies that we can use in order to control HLB. And also the planting direction is an advantage that we should explore. We had here Luis Montesino, a PhD student, and I also work with him, and we analyzed the different images from citrus farms where border plots where the plots were planted side by side. Some of them were perpendicular to the border and others were parallel to the border. And we saw that the incidence of diseased plants was 17% lower in the plots with a parallel planting. Probably because when plants grow, they form a barrier and they do not allow the insect to go into the property, into that plot. So they end up concentrating on a narrower area. On the other hand, on the perpendicular plot, they do have a row and they can follow through the plot. This would be an important measure to be adopted because of this characteristic of the psyllids being most concentrated in the border of the farm. We can use that to help us, and obviously knowing that we have more psyllids found at the border of the property of the farm, and that will bring us more plants with greening and HLB, our control strategy in the farm should be different as well. I may have more frequent spraying, insecticide spraying in the border of the farm with a more intense management in the plot, in the border plots, than in the inner part of the plot where I don't have as many diseased plants. So I would not need the same management applied to the whole plot. I could concentrate a specific treatment to the border region. So since I am working more in the border region, how can I bring down that cost? And the first thing that we think about is to try to use tractors and have the tractor going exactly through the border with the spraying. We can use that nozzle turned to the border of the plot. We assessed if that would have an effect, a weekly spraying, if that could have any control over HLB, thinking that most insects are coming from outside. They will remain on the first plants, and that high frequency application, in addition to being faster and quicker, could get effects. We assessed that with a turbo, and this was a study from Fabiano, also at Fundecitrus, and we separated the border area at the farm without the border spraying and another one with the border spraying on a weekly basis. And we assessed the population of insects captured in the different distances regarding the border of the property, as well as the number of new plants with HLB that we found over the experiment. Remember, in this area, we had monthly border spraying the total area, and here on the site we had the border spraying every 14 days, and then this other in the total area at every 30 days. These were plants that were 4 years old with canopies of 4 meters and over 15 square meters or cubic meters of canopy. So these are growths at least with 2 meters high. And these are the results in terms of psyllids captured in the traps. Most of them, 60%, in both treatments, they were captured in the first plants, but 30 to 40% of the insects captured were at distances over 30 meters up to 130 meters. That's where we had the traps set at, up to 130. So 30 to 40% were beyond the spraying area. If I wanted to control 90% of psyllids, I would have had spraying up to 97 meters, not only the border of the plot, and that has reflected on the population of plants with HLB found. I had here where we did not have a spraying 22% of plants with HLB. They were in the first row of planting, but the other 80% came up to 180, 190 meters in the area we evaluated. And the same happened with the border application, and it was not different, the number of new plants. This is the average of plants that we have seen in each one of the areas. So I had from 75 to 85% of new plants had way beyond the first plant. If we analyze the coverage efficiency for border spraying, both in the parallel plot and the perpendicular plot, spraying both the jet and the atomizer or the nozzle, the effect is very similar. The coverage over 30%, which is very efficient to have a residual period of insecticide in the plant, and so that we can kill psyllids. That would be a coverage of 30%. It was only efficient in the first plant. The second plant had coverage of 10% or less than 10%. And so I'm just protecting the first plant. And that is when I have a spraying in the perpendicular direction. When I have the pulverization or the spraying in a parallel direction, I just protect the front of the plant, and I don't even have coverage here on the back of the plant. So that makes it very difficult to control it. So that type of spraying only will protect the first plant and not the whole plot, which is needed because the psyllids are not only in the first plant, they go to the inner part of the plot as well. And that suggests that we need to adopt smart strategies that in which we will have to have different plantings. And I checked quickly in Google Earth. We see new properties with this new planting model. We have an area of at least 100 meters here. This is already planned for a more frequent application of insecticides. We'll have to separate that. You see that these are parallel, and here we'll have frequent spraying, both aerial and terrestrial as well. This is another case. In case you cannot have done it in parallel direction, at least this is easier for you here to come and go with the tractor so that you can have the frequent spraying. Another example. Here, in this case, it was not only 100 meters, but ends up being the whole plot being sprayed with more frequency. So you will see different farms that have adopted this measure as a rational strategy of optimizing the border effect to control HLB. You will have frequent applications in this area of the grove and less frequent in the central area of the grove, and depending if it is bearing fruit or not. This is another example of the same type of planting, another farm. So you see that all of them have been prepared for that type of management of HLB, knowing that the disease will come and that you have to protect the border of the farm. And here we have perspectives about frequent border spraying, preparing the border for that type of control. Marcelo will talk more about that tomorrow. The choline, how we can work. We could be using choline at the border of the farm as a repellent of psyllids, or bait plants thinking about the strategy of having a barrier of plants that would be attractive here. It could be a Moraia SSP barrier, for instance, and maybe here a resistant or repellent plant associated with choline, maybe thinking about higher plant density in the border, because you know you will lose more plants there. You have to close that area to have it more dense. And also you may have the canopy rootstock combination that also will help avoiding the psyllid go into the farm. That's what I had to bring to you. And we'll have a Q&A session very soon, and we can talk more. Thank you for your attention.